Hi, Emily.
Hello, Dan.
You seem suspiciously chipper. I'm now a bit afraid of what you're going to say the topics are.
Oh, it's nothing crazy. Just explaining Roth conversion timelines, 13 tax hacks and whether legitimate, and what to do about late enrollment in an HSA or FSA if you miss open enrollment.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Oh, that is a shit sandwich of topics. You have two lovely topics wrapped around a terrible topic. Why would you do this to me?
I like variety, keeps me interested.
Joy. All right, well, let's talk about one of the fun things before you torture me with tax topics.
I love that you think Roth conversions are a fun topic to discuss.
They're awesome.
They are. We do plenty of those. That's true. Before we get into it, I thought I would maybe have you briefly explain what they are in case anyone listening has no idea what we're talking about.
Sure. So, succinctly, Roth conversions are going to be essentially the strategy of converting pre tax retirement assets and sometimes after tax retirement assets. So, money that's held in a 401k, money that's held in an IRA, into a Roth 401k or into a Roth IRA. And then there's several sources and nuances that go into that, but that's the basic principle or the basic thing that's happening. And the idea behind this strategy is if you have low income years, or maybe you take a gap between retiring and claiming Social Security where your income is super low because of that, that it can be a great strategy to go ahead and pay taxes early on some of your retirement. And then provided that your wealth compounds and that it's growing and that you live long enough, you'll end up with more money on an after-tax and untaxable basis in your Roth accounts. So that way you have less tax liability over the rest of your lifetime.
Beautiful. What about backdoor Roth conversions and mega backdoor Roth conversions?
So those are two different things. That's an important thing to keep in mind here. When you make contributions to a Roth IRA specifically, there are limitations in statute based on whether you're single, head of household, or married. That essentially say if you make too much money, you cannot contribute directly to a Roth. However, there is nothing preventing you from making a non-deductible contribution to a traditional IRA, let's say on a given Monday, and then converting your after-tax IRA contribution amount into a Roth IRA the next Tuesday. Now, there's a whole separate conversation we could have here about something called the pro rata rule, which can make that a really messy, bad idea. But assuming you didn't have any of those complicating factors, it lets you get around the income limit on making direct Roth IRA contributions. In the case of the mega backdoor Roth, the idea here is that you already have an employee contribution limit to your 401k plan. So this year, for example, it's a $23,500 if you're under 50. It's $30,500 if you're over 50. And then if you're 60 to 63, there's a couple more $1,000s on top of that. But essentially the idea here is if you work in a company, particularly big companies like Amazon or Apple, where they have this set up appropriately, you can make after-tax contributions, not pre-tax deductible contributions or Roth contributions to your 401k above the 23,500 limit or the additional limits for catch-ups. And when you do that, you then have the ability to then, just like the backdoor Roth IRA, do a conversion into the Roth side immediately after, essentially allowing you to put even more money into your 401k plan than the normal employee contribution limits.
And both of these options are completely legitimate and on the up and up, even though they sound a little convoluted.
A little convoluted and perhaps a little bit suspicious, but actually going back a couple of years, the IRS released a notice that essentially said, hey, we know that this is a thing. We are not, required by statute to enforce a rule against doing it, so we're not going to. Now, there are some debate here. There's something in tax called the step doctrine, where essentially it doesn't matter how many steps you take between point A and point B. What you intended to arrive at is how everything is treated going into it. So because of that, there was always some concern that if you were contributing after-tax dollars to an IRA or a 401k and then converting it, that the IRS would view that as you just making Roth contributions in the first place. But again, they did come out a couple of years ago and just say, hey, we know that this is a thing. We don't care. Do what you want.
Great. I like peace of mind like that. All right.
I will just say the IRS, however, itself does say that you cannot rely on any information it publishes to the internet. So just keep in mind that they always sort of reserve the right to say we changed our mind or never mind or that wasn't accurate. So it's just something to be cognizant of, that just because they say it's permitted right now does not mean that you can rely on that in tax court. If you're ever getting audited, if you're ever having somebody come after you for taxes for some reason, make sure you've engaged good tax attorney as legal counsel, just because you don't want to just be like, well, I read on the website, because they're going to immediately say at the website disclaimer says you can't rely on the website.
Huh. I like that a little bit less, but it's good to know.
No one said our government runs in a fully efficient or effective way without any convolution or confusion.
That is very true. All right, well, let's talk timeline of Roth conversions. Here, we generally do them at the end of the year, but I wanted to talk a little bit about why that is. Again, for people who are listening and maybe wouldn't understand why that's our preference.
Sure. So why don't you take a stab at it, actually? Why do you think we want to do it towards the end of the year instead of early in the year?
Well, from when I go through people's data, it's a lot of things change throughout the year that they maybe weren't anticipating. We can sit down in January and they can say, this is how much I plan to make this year. I don't think I'm going to win the lottery or get an inheritance. These are my figures. These are my numbers. This is a very simplified version, but that's what we're looking at. And so they want to do a Roth conversion, which is a very permanent thing to do. You can't necessarily undo this. And then something happens during the year that we weren't anticipating, which means that we've done the incorrect amount of conversions and, potentially bumped them up into a higher tax bracket, for example. And then you're just kind of stuck with the fact that you've done that.
Yeah, that really is the core reason. It is sort of a conscious decision to say, look, at the beginning of the year, we have an idea of what the year is going to look like. But what if, right? What if you inherit money? What if you, go gambling up at Blackhawk and suddenly have some surprise winnings? What if you own some stock that wasn't worth much and then it's worth a lot, and then you need to buy a car, so you decide you're going to sell the stock? That creates a taxable event. There's just a lot of uncertainty between January and December. So we like to get into sort of the November, December timeframe and go, okay, we're really close to the end of the year. Surprise risk is pretty low at this point. So we can look at your income, we can look at your pay stubs, we can look at your capital gains, dividends, interest, all that stuff, and look at that and have a decent degree of confidence that we're going to have some degree of margin between where we are right now and then the end of the year, to then be able to say, hey, there's an extra 20,000 left in your tax bracket or 50,000 left in your tax bracket. But that risk also gets a lot bigger, particularly as somebody gets older, because, for example, let's say somebody is over 65, so they're on Medicare. Medicare premiums, which are charged to you monthly and typically are just withheld from your Social Security benefit if you're taking Social Security, those charges are based on your income calculation from the prior year. So what happens there is, let's say here in 2025, if you're single and your income in 2024 was less than $106,000, then you're just going to pay the base premium for Medicare. You're going to pay the lowest possible fee for Part B, and you're not going to pay anything for Part D. Cool. Well, if you have a higher level of income and you go over that 106,000 if you're single, or over 212,000 if you're married, you're going to end up paying extra for your Medicare for no particular reason, except for the fact that your income is higher and the government says, hey, you can afford to pay more, so we're going to make you pay more. So take the married couple example. Let's say we've done the math in December and we think their income is going to be, 130 for the year. We could pretty safely say in mid-December, hey, let's go ahead and do a Roth conversion of something like 70,000. And that's going to be, nice and short of the $212,000 limit, so 130,000 plus 70,000. And if we do that, we can convert that and probably stay in our current tax bracket or fill in most of our current tax bracket and not end up paying more in Medicare. But if we made that assumption at the beginning of the year, if we said, oh, this year you're going to make 130, let's do a $70,000 Roth conversion. And then again, you sell something, you sell your house, you move, you sell a car, you trade your stocks a little bit too much and incur a little bit too much in capital gains. Or heck, maybe you just have a lot of money sitting in a high yield savings or CD or something, and it pays out enough interest. You could find yourself on the wrong side of that line. So we just like working on it later in the year because we have a lot greater certainty about the tax outcome and the potential impacts to Medicare costs.
Sure. And, once you do it, there's not much you can do to fix these situations, is there?
No, the government generally does not look favorably on takebacks. There's a situation here where maybe one of the two spouses in this example is still working, and we realize we went over the limit too early in the year and we're going to be on the wrong side of it, but they have access to a retirement plan, so they can try to shove some money in a 401k to drop their income. It just gets messy. There's a lot of factors where things get added back into these income calculations. And so just from that standpoint, it's the question here, because I guess the question I would posit to you, and maybe you can give our audience the correct answer here. Why would we want to do it at the beginning of the year instead of the end of the year? What difference does it make?
Well, I mean, if you're considering the time value of money, it makes sense to do it earlier in the year.
Absolutely, right? So for anybody who's listening to that and the phrase time value of money means nothing to you, which if it means something to you, that means you have a sad soul like us. So, enjoy your privilege of not knowing what that means. But I'm going to ruin it for you now. Time value of money just calculates, sort of whether compounding is happening over time. And one of the factors in that is it happening at the beginning of the year? So if I pay my mortgage early, or if I put money into an investment account at the beginning of the year, then I reap the benefits of that over the course of the year. Whereas if I pay my mortgage, at the end of the term, or if I put money into the investment account at the end of the term, I don't get the benefit of the whole year along the way. So it's just an impacting factor of whether you're making these payments, these contributions early, and whether you get the benefits over the course of the year or not. And so that's where, there is value to doing it early in the year, but we just tend to view it on a risk basis as not being worth the premium of doing so.
So ever a scenario where you would recommend maybe doing some of it earlier in the year to take advantage of that time value money factor and then doing the remainder at the end of the year? Or is that too risky?
Sure. I mean, we're going to meet with a client literally tomorrow who would like to do an early Roth conversion, right? They think there's a healthy enough margin between where they expect to be for income and where the end of the year is that they just don't think they're at risk of going too close to those lines. So doing something like a small conversion of, let's say, like 20 or 30 when you've got, let's say, $80,000 of runway, you're probably safe to do that. But again, it's always just a question of risk, because the probably is carrying a lot of weight there. At the beginning of the year, if we have stable sources of income like Social Security or an annuity or something like that, where we know what we're going to get from those sources throughout the year, and we know it's not going to change on us throughout the year, then we find ourselves really quickly in a position where we could just say, well, I know what my income's going to be, so I probably can convert this exact dollar amount and I'll be fine. But that is the point where the probably is carrying the weight. It's that what if factor. What if something happens that messes up your tax picture that's unexpected, right? Because we can plan for what we know is going to happen. What we don't know is going to happen is going to be the thing that gets us in trouble here.
Sure. But as long as they fully understand the process and they're comfortable taking the risk, then yeah, can do part of it.
Well, and that's part of life, right? You can assume greater risks on your own behalf, but as your financial planner, my job is here to help you make risk-adjusted decisions that optimize your financial outcomes. So from that standpoint, I'm never going to recommend that you take an undue risk, like doing a conversion earlier in the year versus later in the year, because I don't know the unpredictable things. You don't know the unpredictable things. So I'm not just going to hand wave that and be like, oh, you'll be fine. Because what if? And I really don't want to be the person who told you, hey, we tried to make an extra, $2,000 tax free this year. Unfortunately, we messed up and now it's costing you $5,000, $6,000 over the next year in higher Medicare costs or taxes you now owe.
Right. That is not a conversation I want to have with anybody.
Yeah, let's avoid that topic.
All right. Well, that's about all I've got on Roth conversions, unless there's anything that you want to add there.
Only that I really wish you had more to talk about on Roth conversions, because I know it's coming next.
This one's fun. I had so much fun actually kind of looking up this next topic. You're going to love it, Dan.
Yay.
All right. Well, it's, people are getting their tax documents this time of year, and there's a lot of questions about taxes in general and how can I avoid paying what I owe? What can I write off? All of these questions, right? I'm seeing all these things on social media of loopholes and little hacks and things you can do and like secret stuff that you can write off that you didn't know about. And I want to go over some of that.
Okay, before we get started, I'm going to express the law of physics in the same way that we talk about like the law of gravity or the laws of thermodynamics. I'm going to explain the law of physics when it comes to taxes. All income is taxable unless specifically excluded, and nothing can be deducted unless explicitly permitted. Okay. I'm saying that up front because you're going to hear me reference that principle probably through this entire thing.
Right, because I have a little list here of things that I found online, questions people have posed. Some of them are ones people have asked me directly, but most of it is just from social media hacks that I found.
Okay. Hit me with the internet's dumb ideas about how to save money on taxes.
All right, the first one, and I hear this one a lot, is can I write off my electric bill if I'm working from home?
Partially. So, first of all, you have to be working from home and you have to have a qualified business to expense it against. So, you can't just say, like, I work from home 1 day a week and that counts and I get a deduction for it. But if you run your business out of your home and you have a dedicated office space or workshop space, then you're eligible for the home office deduction. There's a standardized deduction that's just based on square footage. The alternative is you are allowed to try to claim a deduction based on the proportion of square footage and expenses allocated to that office or to that space. So, for example, if you have a dedicated office, a dedicated workshop, it's used for nothing but your business, then you're eligible to potentially claim either just in the basic formula based on the square footage, or you can say, hey, this office makes up 10% of the square footage of my house. Therefore, I'm going to allocate 10% of my mortgage costs, my utilities, et cetera, to that space for the purpose of claiming the deduction. However, a ton of people do this wrong, number one. And number two, there's still a pretty harsh cap on how much you can claim for this deduction. So what comes of that then is that ultimately most people who are claiming the home office deduction are not actually eligible to claim the home office deduction. And often people try to abuse it where they're going to say, like, oh, to your question, can I just write off my electric bill? No, you can only write off a portion of it related to the office use, and it has to be specifically for the office use. So if the IRS auditor comes to your house and finds out that your home office also has a bed in it, because it's actually a guest bedroom that you just also happen to have a desk in it, you just lost your deduction.
Wow, very specific. The second question is very similar. I see a lot of people asking about their rent. I work from home, I have home office. Can you do the same thing with rent?
Same sort of issue here as far as the costs, but again, it's the home office deduction that's going to actually be the pass through here. You do get into a weird and dumb world where people will like buy a property and then try to rent it back to themselves, and then somehow claim that they can both expense the income, but also then not claim the income from renting it to themselves. It's a big loop-de-loop logic circle that just ends up in a black hole that doesn't actually qualify. So whether you own your home, whether you rent, you may be eligible for some home office deductions based on the actual genuine business use of that space. But no, you can't just say, again, like, I work from home 2 days a week, so I'm going to claim that 2 out of every 30 days of the month is deductible on my rent or something like that.
Sure. All right, this next one is somewhat relevant with Valentine's Day coming up, but I saw somebody post and ask, okay, if I'm co-owning a business with my girlfriend and we go out for dinner, can I write all this off as a business expense?
So you will often hear or see examples of what I like to call the morons deduction when it comes to this. So like somebody will go out to dinner with their friends, family, whatever. So I'll use financial planning as the example. I'll be like, oh, I'm going to take my wife out to dinner, and then I'm going to talk to her about my day at work and the services we provide to her as a client of our firm. And therefore, this was a business dinner. And that is not going to hold up under an audit at all. So not only do we need to have like the receipts, but the dinner and dining expenses need to be reasonable for that purpose. And all of this is going to flow through just a basic criteria, which is at the end of the day, is the expense being incurred ordinary in the type of business you're running and necessary in the type of business you're running. So you can't just take all your friends and family, your girlfriend, whatever, out to dinner and just be able to claim like, oh, well, I mentioned that I'm a financial planner at dinner, so now it's a business dinner. That's not how it works. It has to be a business meeting that happens to involve a meal to be eligible for this type of deduction. Otherwise, you're just committing kind of casual tax fraud. Now, to be fair, a ton of people do this. They shouldn't do it, but they do it. And it's something to just be mindful of, that owning a business does not mean that you just get to start writing off your day-to-day costs of living.
Right. Okay. Well, the next one's a little bit different. I saw somewhere else it said if you've been the victim of a cyber attack and paid money as a ransom or something like that, you can claim that amount lost as a tax deduction. Is that true?
So that actually is possible. Losses from theft, so something you've actually reported to the police, said, hey, like, my bike has been stolen, my car has been stolen, or in this case, right, my computer was taken over and I had to pay money to get it back. Those are losses from theft. And so as long as you've done the correct documentation and reported the crime and so on, and can, actually validate that you had a genuine financial loss from that, that is actually something you might be able to deduct. I wouldn't go courting cyber crime against yourself to find a reason to burn money to try to write it off. You're better off just keeping the money and paying taxes on it. But if you're a victim of a crime, there are some tax deductions that go hand in hand with it. A fun thing that is also that all of the tax forms say that you need to report income from crime as well. So if you make money by stealing things from other people or doing cyber crime or whatever it is, you're supposed to report that as taxable income, which I just think is funny, because then if you don't, they can get you not only on the theft or the fraud or whatever it is, but also on tax evasion for not reporting income from your criminal activities.
I have a sub question there on that one. How important is it that you've filed a police report? Because a lot of the scams that you see online is people willingly transferring money because they've believed some sort of lie.
Well, I mean, in that particular sense, it's really more a question about documentation. You're claiming a deduction from theft in this particular case. And so it just becomes, how are you substantiating that, right? If the process for paying off the ransom was you just needed to Venmo somebody some money, then that doesn't really look like a ransom payment to an auditor. That looks like maybe paying somebody for dinner, or paying somebody rent, or paying off, some plane tickets or whatever else that your buddy bought you. So I think the police report helps with the substantiation, and you could keep and save all the emails or messages you've received or something like that to help substantiate it. But just in general, you are a victim of a crime. I think it's a good idea to report crimes as a general premise, unless maybe there's like a, talk to the police and we'll kill a hostage situation going on. But otherwise, I think just generally speaking, you should probably be making the law enforcement aware of crimes that you are a victim of.
Very true. Okay, now I've got one about dogs. Someone online claims that I can claim a guard dog as an expense if it protects the premises of my business, and I can write off vet bills, food, training, all of this stuff can be deducted.
So this just comes back to the ordinary and necessary principle. If I bought a dog for our office here as a financial planning firm and tried to claim it was a guard dog, I think any auditor would be like, cool, what was it guarding? What was the necessity of this? What good is this dog doing you relative to the nature of your business? But if you ran, a private security company, a paramilitary company, or even, you have a dog-based business, right? You're a professional trainer, then it has to do with your business, right? If you're a farmer, animals are part of your business. And so that becomes an ordinary necessary business expense. But just being like, I bought a German Shepherd and it lives in our office and now it's a business deduction, that doesn't really work. It needs to be ordinary and necessary for the conduct of your business. So unfortunately, no, you cannot write off expenses on Fluffy or Chihuahua that you just bring to the office from time to time.
I guess I could have seen that one coming. Okay. I saw somebody post on a very fun Reddit thread that they don't think they have to pay tax on a short-term rental business because it's listed on Airbnb, and that means Airbnb is already paying taxes and they don't have to.
No. So what's happening here is you have a contractor relationship with Airbnb. Airbnb is essentially acting as a solicitor on your behalf. So Airbnb is a separate business. You're a separate business. And what's happening here is they are paying Airbnb. Airbnb is taking its commission or its cut, and then it is passing through the remainder of the payments to you. You'll often see a 1099-K that actually reflects sort of credit card payments and digital payments made to and through Airbnb for this. And then that comes to you. That is not a tax withheld number. Now, Airbnb may handle some of the remittance of things like local lodging taxes or luxury taxes or hotel taxes in your particular jurisdiction. That might be handled for you. But whatever they're sending to you is essentially your gross revenue in a business. And then you might have other expenses you're paying for. Maybe you make some updates or some improvements to your properties. Maybe you're paying a third-party property manager to just sort of take care of the business there. But whatever profit flows through is taxable income to your business, and you are responsible for remitting the tax payments for that.
Again, very fair. Could have seen that coming. This next one is from a forum that I found of another planner posting an example who said they had a client who was 100% shareholder of an S Corp, and that he and his wife also owned a beachfront condo. So every year, the whole family would go to the week-long shareholder meeting, in quotes, for his corporation at this condo, and that meant he could write off the travel costs, groceries, beach supplies, meals, golf, the whole trip. All of that he thought was a write-off.
Definitely not true. So you can make business use of personnel assets and have some deductibility to it, but this is all going to come back to that ordinary and necessary criterion. So, for example, when you have that trip, the question that's going to immediately apply here is, if you're flying out to the beach house, okay, which of your family members actually work in your business, and therefore how necessary is it for any of those family members to come on this trip with you? Are you flying commercial versus flying first class? How necessary is it to fly first class versus commercial economy or whatever the case is? When you get there, right, what percentage of your activities spent on the property are business related versus just having a good time? Essentially, the breakdown here is anything that's a legitimate business expense as part of this. Let's say you are a business partner with your brother, so you're going to bring your family, and your brother's going to bring his family to the condo and whatnot, and you're going to quote unquote rent it to yourself or something like that. Any part of this that you and your brother are involved in, your travel to the location, some of your meals, some of your expenses related to this could be deductible. But what they're trying to do here is abuse a couple of things. They're trying to abuse something called the Augusta rule, which allows you to rent out a property for a limited amount of time throughout the year and essentially ignore the taxes on doing so. But again, personal use is a pretty clear abuse of this that a lot of people run afoul of. And then all this stuff about like golf and meals and outings and beach supplies, none of this is ordinary and necessary. None of this is required. I'll use our recent company retreat as an example of this. There's no beach house, but for that trip, the entire team flew first class to New Orleans. We stayed at a nice hotel. We had meetings. We did company stuff. We also had some outings. Everything on that trip that was a core expense. So, for example, the economy value of the trip for the flights, the actual base lodging cost for the hotel stay, and sort of the nominal cost of some of the meals were business deductible on that trip. But conversely, the fact that we flew first class versus economy, that to me, that became an owner's draw to me. That was a luxury that I was essentially paying for out of pocket. That was not a deductible expense. Going to Commander's Palace for one of the dinners, very nice. It's not Michelin star rated, but it's that quality of restaurant. That's a very nice restaurant, not ordinary and necessary. So there's some deductibility of a base level of cost, but I was not going to get to write off the almost $1,000 bill for that dinner. And that just comes back to the core basis here. Anything you're doing has to have an ordinary and necessary business expense purpose. And a lot of people get themselves in trouble by listening to influencers who are like, I bought a luxury car and then I put my logo on the car, so the car is a write-off. And then I bought some tailored suits and I embroidered my name on it. So that's part of my business now. Like, all this stuff is just absolutely rampant tax fraud. And the thing is, a lot of people are getting away with it because the IRS is underfunded, understaffed, and can't audit enough people. But in a world where everybody got audited every year or had to justify their expenses, none of this crap would fly.
How are you keeping track of things like you said, the economy value of the flight, for example, versus what we actually paid for first class? You're just keeping receipts of the difference and everything in case you do get audited?
Yeah, so keeping receipts from the actual flights themselves, but then also running the cost differential to have those same flights for everybody, and literally printing off sort of the screenshot view of that web page saying, here's how much the economy flight costs. That's the deductible travel expense here, but the delta between that and the first class seats is all essentially non-deductible owner's compensation because I'm choosing to take that in. There's then an extended part where you can say that this is actually employee compensation or employee wage benefits here. I chose not to pass that on to you as the employees. I chose to take that on myself, bearing in mind that I have a higher tax rate than anybody else at the company. So it's actually paying more taxes than if I passed it through to you. But that wasn't part of what we discussed as a team. I didn't say, hey, we'll do this, and if we do that, you have to pay extra. It was, hey, we're going to do this. We have it in the budget to do it, so I'm going to go ahead and do it, and I'm just eating the taxes on that.
Well, the rest of us appreciate that.
I'm sure you do. And the irony is that the IRS could give me some guff for that and be like, well, no, this was all still something that was related to them. I'm like, yeah, but I pay more taxes anyway, so you still win.
Right. They'll probably be okay with that.
Probably. We'll see.
Okay, so next one. I saw a lot of questions online around cosmetic surgery. And an example of that was like a personal trainer who said, her looks are her business and she has to be a good example. So cosmetic surgery should be a write-off.
Yeah, this one's not going to fly almost ever. You've got to have like a really extreme French case to win this one. Because a really popular example is something like I'm just going to use a bit of a bold example here, but people like sex workers will often try to deduct things like clothing. But the rule on making deductions, that sort of thing, is that it has to be uniquely used for that business. So if you work at a company and they have like a shirt or a logo shirt or like a special pair of coveralls or something that you wear that you would never wear for any other reason or any other purpose, or it's like a hazmat suit sort of thing, that's the sort of stuff you can deduct when it comes to your appearance. But when you do something like buy nice suits or nice clothes, you're not going to get to deduct that. When you do something like plastic surgery, again, there's a handful of tiny cases where some influencers, or again, sex workers are a common example of this, have been able to make the case that their appearance is so core to their brand or to what they do that they've been able to deduct it. But the number of people who've claimed that and lost that battle grossly outweighs the number of people who haven't. So for somebody like a personal trainer, the court would look at you and be like, well, as a personal trainer, isn't the only thing that actually matters to your business that you are A, physically fit, and B, can train other people? Like, why does a nose job matter for this? Why do butt implants or breast implants or anything like that matter for your business? You're going to lose that one almost every single time. So you can give it a shot, but I would be fully in expectation that you can't deduct it and that you're going to end up paying taxes and penalties related to a false deduction.
All right. Well, we won't try that one. All right. Here's someone, and he was all worried, and he wanted to know if he can pay his wife for housework or something similar so that she has earned income and can contribute to an IRA.
You don't need to do any of that. You can always contribute to a spousal IRA on your spouse's behalf. We can cut all of this domestic work stuff out.
He's really worried for no reason then. I hope he hears this podcast.
There is a version of this, though, where you do see some parents try to say, oh, I pay my kid 10 grand a year to take the trash out. And that's a good example where you're just going to get in trouble for it, because the obvious audit question here is, how much would it cost to pay somebody else to take the trash out at your house? And the answer is not 10 grand a year.
Well, that kind of ties to the next one, the example of, can I pay my child for something like being the model for my business? I use a picture of my baby in an advertisement and, something around all that.
Easy audit question here. How much does a stock photo of a baby cost? And the point there is going to be back to ordinary and necessary. Is it ordinary to use pictures of children or your family or something like that as advertising in a small, closely held business? Yeah. Lots of, my pictures on our website, your pictures on our website. It's very normal to see pictures of the owner and their family or something on different types of websites. That's very normal. When you try to say oh, my kid is a model and therefore I need to pay them 20 grand a year so I can max out a Roth IRA for them or something like that, all the IRS has to do there is say, unless your kid is a legitimate model, like your kid is the Gerber baby, right, and is actually making a serious living or a ton of income being an actual child model, then this is not ordinary and necessary. You're just trying to overcompensate for something stupid, and it's going to be disallowed.
So you and I shouldn't put model on our resumes?
Well, yeah. I mean, if on that particular level, if you want to go for it, I think you could probably get away with that. I definitely cannot get away with that unless there's a grumpy old men quarterly or something that I could be on the cover of.
There probably is. I'll look into that for you. The next one I found was in reference to lawn care expenses. Someone was saying, I run my business out of my home, and I have to, if I demonstrate that my house is my workplace and it's important that having the nicely manicured lawn and blah, blah, blah. Can I write that off?
Nope, you're going to fail the ordinary and necessary test there almost instantaneously. I think you would have a better argument if you ran a landscaping business, or if you were something like a real estate developer. You could, for example, write off the costs of landscape improvements to a model home in a housing development you're working on, because you're doing that to advertise the properties you're selling. But if you just say oh, I need to have a beautiful house and therefore it's ordinary and necessary for me to have a beautiful house, that's not going to fly. Another version of this you sometimes see is realtors will buy really expensive, overpriced cars. They'll drive an $80,000 Lexus, and they'll say, well, I have to look good to my clients. No client on earth gives a flying fuck what kind of car you drive, Kendra. It's a car that gets you to showings. And they would be just as understanding if you drove a minivan because you have 3 kids. It just doesn't actually matter. And that's where a lot of people, again, not a lot of people are getting audited because it's just the IRS being underfunded. But if you get audited for that on an ordinary necessary basis, you're going to find yourself in trouble pretty quickly.
Okay. Well, my second to last one, Dan, you're almost there. Someone who's saying, I work for a church and they don't pay taxes, so therefore I don't have to either. I fall under that same umbrella.
You do not. If you work for a church, you are a W-2 employee of that church, and you have to pay ordinary federal, state income tax and payroll taxes. There are some exemptions for things like a parsonage allowance, which is where you get into things where there's a little house behind the church that the priest lives in or something like that. That is the same tax provision where you get into crazy things like megachurch reverends living in mansions. That's a whole separate conversation and topic. But just generally speaking, if you're any random employee for a church, there are no special tax rules for you. And if you are a religious employee of that church, i.e. the priest or rabbi or whatever is applicable to that particular faith, there are some special rules around retirement plans and housing allowances, but not to the point where you can just say, I don't have to pay taxes.
Very sad. Okay. The last one, I saw several variations of online, and it was, okay, my gambling losses are a tax write-off, so it's basically free.
Simple mathematical question here. If I burn $1 to save 20 cents in taxes, how did I net out? The answer here being I lost 80 cents. So you can write off gambling losses against gambling winnings, because at the end of the day, it's a net of gambling wins and losses question as far as the taxes go. But you cannot just gamble all your money away and then claim that you don't have any income. You can only claim the deduction to the point that you net out at zero, not that you then have negative income that you can write off against all your other sources of income.
Again, sounds about right. Okay, Dan, you made it through that question, and we can move on to our third and final topic.
Oh, thank God.
Okay, so let's say we're in a scenario, I missed enrollment for an FSA, for example. Do I have any options? Same thing for HSA, so either one we can answer here.
So if you missed your open enrollment window, there's a couple things that kick into this. Number one, does your employer plan permit changes? Because some companies will just be like, yeah, you can do that whenever you want. You're fine. Other companies will say, no, you have to do it during open enrollment or a special enrollment period. Special enrollment periods are triggered by life events. So the gain of a job, loss of a job, addition of a child, loss of a family member. So essentially just changes in your household composition, whether it's from occupation or from literal family numbers or status or health status, that then trigger special open enrollment periods. So for example, if you get married in the middle of the year, and your open enrollment period is not until the end of the year, you have a special enrollment period to get your spouse on your health insurance, and that's going to be pretty typical. The same thing's going to apply here in the HSA and FSA land. If you do not have an employer plan that permits changes at will or ad hoc, then you're going to need a special enrollment event to make that possible.
Otherwise, you have to wait till the next year to take advantage of that window again.
Essentially, right? Because the big thing on group employment and benefit plans, like for you, it's always about like what's good for me and what's flexible for me. You have to understand, particularly the bigger a company gets, that this becomes a very large administrative task, because technically they have to report every year you, your spouse, your children to these insurance carriers so they can price their policies appropriately. And so if you're sort of willy-nilly trying to make changes in the middle of the year, most carriers don't want that to happen. They need stable revenue throughout the year so that they can actually insure against the risk pool that your company or your group of employees actually applies to.
Sure. Okay. Well, could you briefly explain the difference between a healthcare FSA and a dependent FSA?
So both of these are going to have a core distinction from an HSA, which is that you have a use it or lose it provision. You have to spend the money by the end of the year. Some plans allow up to a 2 or 3 month grace period, so out to like February or March, that you can spend the money from last year. But if you put money in any type of flex spending account and do not utilize it for a qualified expense, it is going to be remitted to the Treasury after the end of the grace period. So within that, the core distinction between a healthcare and a dependent care is really in the name. The healthcare is there to pay for glasses, prescriptions, checkups, copays, you name it, for medical care. And the dependent care is going to be there to pay for childcare from a qualified or registered provider.
Can I use it for a nanny, or does it have to be like a facility?
It could be for a nanny. You're going to run into things then where often a lot of people have household employees that they're not accurately reporting or doing taxes for. The the way that a lot of people treat household employees is that they say, oh, you're actually just a contractor, even though you nanny for my kids 5 days a week, eight hours a day, which sure does make you an employee. But in those particular cases, a lot of people will just write the check and be like, cool, you're self-employed, you're on your own for that. And the FSA would be eligible for either type of expense there, so long as you're actually doing the tax compliance correctly. If you're just writing checks from your FSA to some random person and then claiming that they're a nanny, you can do that in how you file your taxes and whatnot, but you're probably going to have problems during an audit.
Yeah. Could somebody have both kinds of FSAs, or do you have to have one or the other?
You can have both kinds. The bigger restriction is that you can't have an FSA and an HSA on the healthcare side simultaneously. So you could, and this varies in households. You could have a situation where one spouse has an HSA and one spouse has an FSA, and that has to do with separate employer plans and whatnot. But generally speaking, the same person cannot have an HSA and an FSA. They're only going to have one. In that particular practice, though, you could have a healthcare FSA and a dependent care FSA, or an HSA and a dependent care FSA.
Okay, I guess that makes sense about why we look at everyone's employee benefit guide then when they onboard.
Well, yeah, not only because it's important to understand what options are available to them, but also to make sure that we're not doing contradictory things. Because the trick is with a lot of this stuff is no one's going to stop you. Like, there's no FSA police or HSA police that are going to just jump out of the bushes and be like, hey, you can't do that. You'll do it, or your employer might let you do it if they don't have good controls in place. But when it comes time to either file your taxes or to complete an audit, you're going to run into issues with it.
Do they send out any kind of reminder towards the end of the year, like, hey, your FSA, you should spend that,
The good providers do, because that's sort of the obvious thing. Like, nobody actually wants this money to go to the treasury. They would rather you get some use out of it. This is where also a lot of medical providers like dentists and optometrists say that December is the busy season, because a ton of people are like, oh gosh, I've got $800 left. Better go get my eyes checked. Better go get my teeth cleaned.
That makes sense.
All right. Well, with the shit sandwich of tax questions devoured and survived, thank goodness, I will now turn this back on you. Emily, what is the thing you have learned here in the last couple of weeks that you think is valuable for our audience to know and learn and garner from your experience?
I would say that I've learned that you are correct, that it's good for a financial planner to have a financial planner, because I have all of my tax forms and I haven't filed. And I also haven't opened my HSA for this year, even though I've done all of these things and helped everyone else do it. I haven't done it for myself.
Yeah, accountability is one of those tricky things where, if it was just about knowledge, we would all be super rich, super fit. And yet, shockingly, most of us are not super rich or super fit. It really is not only about application, but consistent application. And sometimes you just need an accountability partner.
It's just more fun to do all the things for everyone else. It's boring to file my own taxes.
Well, think about it this way. You're probably going to get money back, so file your taxes sooner than later so you can get money.
That's true. I can buy a new backpack. All right.
There you go. Your trip to Patagonia is already partially funded.
There we go. I'm well on my way.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.